Welcome to Mile High Reefers. I'm Scott Anderson, and today we're going to talk about frags versus colonies. What should you buy? When I started in this hobby in 2006, the hobby was really colony dependent, meaning you went to the store, you bought big, gorgeous colonies, and there were very few frags. Well, over the years, the trend in the hobby has been more towards frags, less towards colonies. So in this video, we're going to talk about some of why that trend's been happening and whether you should buy a colony or a frag. To begin with, let's talk about definitions. When I say a frag, I'm talking about little frag plugs that have coral glued to them or grown onto them. When I talk about colonies, I'm talking about larger pieces of coral. The reality is, we're talking about corals as animals, they're colonial animals, so the actual technical definition's gonna be a bit different. To begin with, let's start with the source of the coral. Basically, all the corals in the hobby originated from the ocean. They're currently working on some sexual reproduction of corals, but there's gonna be few and far between in the hobby, if any. But most coral we get are from the ocean. That original mother colony, no matter what, originated from the ocean. So the corals harvested from the ocean and brought into captivity. In the old days, those corals were just sold directly on as colonies. And in fact, today, there's still a lot of corals harvested from the ocean that are sold directly to the end customer as large colonies. And this is really kind of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about colonies. These corals are usually reasonably priced and big and healthy, but they do have their problems. They're directly from the ocean, so they have a risk of pets. They're not used to the aquarium environment, and color is going to be dependent on where they're from. Sometimes you get amazing colonies, sometimes you don't. Of course, with these big colonies coming in, it didn't take hobbyists long to figure out they could break off little pieces of them and they would grow into new colonies. These are the frags. And there's a lot of good to be said for frags. First, it allows you to share or sell your coral. Those big colonies that come in, they grow, and then you can break little pieces off, glue it to a frag plug, and share it among your friends or sell it. It's also allowed us to have some of those absolutely amazing strains, like Jack-o'-lantern leptoceras. Try getting a wild colony. It's not going to be easy. Ask the people in the UK, they're hard to get. But of course, they're common in the United States because the original colony was grown out, fragged up, and those pieces are everywhere. In general, aquacultured frags seem to be healthier, prettier, and better in just about every way except for size. So that's it. Just buy frags. Well, not so fast. The main problem is some corals just aren't great fraggers, like your big single polyp LPS corals. Think like a scully or my big green bubble coral or an acanthophilia. If you were to cut one of these in half, the mortality rate would be high and you might be left with something really undesirable. Imagine you take that nice little round scully, cut it in half, and now you have two half-moon scullies. Well, scullies are slow-growing corals to begin with, so for that coral to become a circle again would take forever, if it ever grew back into a circular coral. So it's just not a good coral for propagation. Other corals like lobos and brains and acans, or lords for the more technical term, they're slow growing coral. So if you see that pretty little frag but you have a big space to fill, it's probably not gonna grow in a time frame that you're really gonna be happy with. I mean, a little acan frag to grow into big colony is gonna take years. And a lot of us don't want to wait years to get our little acan frag into the size we want. So for slow growing corals, it makes a lot of sense to buy that bigger colony. Now, there's the flip side of that. That's actually really good. A lot of people have big tanks like me. We need big corals to fill those big tanks. But the trend in the hobby has been towards smaller tanks. So small, slow-growing coral, like those Favias, work great there. Small coral, small space, slow growing, works fantastic for small tanks. So it can be situational. If you have a big tank and you got a slow growing coral, you're going to want to buy a bigger colony to begin with. Conversely, the frags are fantastic for smaller tanks. Next up, let's talk about price. In general, a frag is going to be cheaper than a colony. They're just smaller. It's part of the reason we cut them up is so that they're affordable. But when you figure it out as a price per square inch, the frag is going to be much more expensive, which is part of the reason we see chop shops in the hobby. A big coral can be cut into lots of little coral, and the person doing the cutting can make a lot of money. They take that big colony they paid a relatively low price for and cut it up into lots of little pieces and sell the little pieces off for far more than they paid for that large colony. With that, let's talk about the hardiness of the frags. Now, those chop shop corals we just talked about, they're probably some of the least hardy frags you're gonna buy. They're super stressed out. But conversely, once the big colonies have had a chance to heal up and get used to the environment, then they take to fragging really well. They can be cut up and then those frags can heal. And healed is super important. A healed frag is worth, to me, so much more than a freshly cut frag. What you're looking for is it to be encrust onto the base in something like an SPS, like an acro or a Monty. If you see that incrustation, it means the coral is completely healed and it's growing onto the base and doing well. In the case of an LPS, you're looking for the tissue to be growing around the sides and it to be healed. This is super important because you want to make sure that the coral's not going to get any infections, it's recovered from the cutting, and it's healed. Now, even better are going to be aquacultured corals. So these are corals that have been in the hobby for really long periods of time who are fragged over and over and over. Think like Worldwide Corals. They've actually done a fantastic job with what they're doing. They send out amazing, well-healed frags with great color, and since they've been in the rotation for so long, they're usually really hardy. The corals I've gotten from Worldwide have been super healthy and have had great survivability. This isn't an advertisement for Worldwide. I just think they're doing better than most when it comes to healing and survivability of their coral. The other thing that happens, of course, is the corals that don't do well in captivity die off, so they're not good candidates for aquaculture, and they never really make their way into the aquaculture industry. And of course, colonies survivability is a bit of a mixed bag as well. Some colonies come in from the ocean and wither and die. Others come in and thrive. Time is a great thing for these corals. My favorite colonies to buy are colonies out of somebody else's tank. I love buying somebody else's big colony that's been around for years. It's hardy, it's healthy, and it's the way to go if you can find it. But the reality is, most of the corals you're gonna buy in a store are going to be wild collected, or most of the colonies you're going to buy in the store are going to be wild collected, and they're going to be a mixed bag as far as survivability. So if there's one that you've been watching for a long time, it's probably a good one to buy. And then of course, there's color. We all want the prettiest, most beautiful coral, and we tend to get these more often in frags than we do in colonies. It's really kind of hard to import the most beautiful coral. The reality is most of the coral in the ocean are kind of in that mid-level kind of bread and butter coral. There's only a very few super ultra corals out there. But of course, as hobbyists, we love those super ultra corals, and those are the ones we tend to propagate because they're of high value. And of course, some of these super ultra corals are only known from one colony. I mean, there's only been one that's ever been brought in or seen. So by fragging, that coral has made its way around the hobby, and some of them even become ubiquitous within the hobby. This is something without fragging just wouldn't happen. So should you buy colonies or frags? It's really situational. What are you looking for? It's all about the size, color, shape. When was it cut? There's so many variables, but hopefully this video has given you a little food for thought. Personally, I'm a big fan of both. I love a good frag, I love a good colony, and I buy based on the space I have to fill and the coral itself. And that's really the way you've got to look at your coral when making your buying decisions. Going forwards, I see this industry moving more and more towards frags. The reality is we get brighter colors when done correctly, we get better survivability, and let's face it, the oceans have their own problems that have got to be dealt with. I think we're going to see big colonies for quite some time from countries like Australia and Vietnam. But really, it only takes an act of the government to shut either one of those coral harvesting locations down. So as an industry, I think it's good to hedge our bets with good aquaculture facilities. Plus, how much fun is it to go to your aquarium and see that big coral that you've been growing for a while, cut a piece off, glue it to a frag plug, let it heal up, and give it to your friend when he comes over. Thanks for watching this episode of Mile High Reefers. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.